The brain.
It weighs only 3 pounds, and yet it is the most complex system we know of in the entire universe, only comparable to the universe itself. It has tens of billions of neurons, and each of these neurons could very well be as complex as the city of New York. It has hundreds of millions of connections. Such is the density that if we take a cubic centimeter of the brain, there will find more connections than stars in the entire Milky Way. But the most surprising thing of all is that such a complex giant network is you. Your dreams, your passions, your ecstasy, your agony, everything is contained in your brain. Therefore, if I were to remove a cubic centimeter from your brain, you would cease to be you. Your ability to reason will most certainly be affected, or your way of seeing colors, or your understanding of music, whatever. However, if I ask all of you to do an exercise as simple as this one, stick out the tip of your tongue and touch the tip of your nose, it is statistically proven that 99% of you are going to try to do this. And not this, which is what I actually asked you guys to do. This trick, this simple illusion, many years ago, at the very beginning, when I was a freshman in college, made me understand that the brain, this complex system with all in its complexity, was a very vulnerable system. It was actually a very easy system to hack. Actually, it was a very easy system to lead to failures, to errors. And that's when my story began. My desire to understand the brain began. I wanted to understand the neurogenesis of the brain's vulnerability. I wanted to become a kind of brain hacker, or even more beautiful, a brain illusionist. Yes. I wanted to learn how to cause the brain to fail. For what? I had no idea at the time. I was only faithful to my heart and went far away to Europe, to the United States, to seek answers to all those questions. But since I wasn't a medical doctor, I couldn't work directly with the brain. So I trained as an engineer, got a master's degree in artificial intelligence. Then I did another master's degree in robotics. I completed my PhD in artificial intelligence and attended a postdoc in neuroengineering. And through all that academic career, I knew a lot of illusions like this, a lot of tricks, but there was one in particular that shed a lot of light on me in my search for answers. That was the rubber hand illusion. This trick is nothing but a tactile visual illusion that works this way. It's, let's see, the tactile sensation of a brushstroke on my hand being visually applied on a fake alien hand. After a minute of applying this illusion, the brain, just after a minute, appropriates that rubber fake hand in such a way that it wants to defend it when it is attacked. This example enlightened me. This example made me understand why I wanted to be a brain illusionist. I understood that being a brain illusionist, I could have the opportunity to take a giant step. In what? In clinical therapies, in the evolution of clinical therapies for neurorehabilitation. For example, what purpose does it serve to make the brain appropriate something totally alien? Well, you can think of brain strokes or cerebrovascular accidents, because in cases like that, the patient loses all motor skills and all mobility. All the sensitivity in one of his legs, for example, and for that patient's brain, the leg was like a rubber leg. It was no longer his. It occurred to me then that if I created an effect similar to that of a rubber hand, I could potentially help those patients regain the mobility in their legs. The problem was that they didn't have any sensitivity left, so I couldn't apply a tactile sensation like that of brushing simply because they wouldn't feel it. Again, they had no tactile sensations. So to tackle this, I started to investigate, to dig into the scientific literature, and finally I realized that the illusion not only worked in a visual tactile realm, but that it could also be cardiovisual. Yes, cardio. Heart beating is another brain sensation, not tactile, but it is a brain sensation as well. So my approach was, using very affordable technology, I came up with a setup that projected the patient's heart beating as flashes of light over his own paralyzed legs. The patient doesn't know that this is their heart rate, but the brain unconsciously does. The results were great. As with the plastic hand, these people were able to reappropriate their legs in too short a time. Patients like the one we see there. With this simple trick, they were able to stand up and walk again in half the time they would have done in normal physical therapy. But this idea continued to evolve with a technological aid. Now, what we do is we sit the patient in front of a screen. We delete his paralyzed leg with computer graphics, and instead we put it as a virtual leg so we can trick the patient's brain into believing it's part of their own body. When I ask the patient to stretch the virtual leg, they attempt to do so mentally, and the virtual leg moves. In reality, I'm controlling the movement through the computer. However, the patient genuinely perceives that they are moving it as if they've regained motor control. Over time, this illusion often leads to real and faster functional recovery. I'm not happy with all this. Now I wanted to remove the computer, and I wanted the patient himself to move that virtual limb through his thoughts or mental commands. Also, I no longer wanted to use it only for strokes, but on amputee patients as well. To place patients in an augmented reality where they see their hand in place and can move it themselves using their own mental motor commands as opposed to someone else moving it through a computer. This will certainly help alleviate the painful phantom limb syndrome. Well, this idea is already a reality. And to show it to all of you, I want you to receive a very special guest, Mrs. Amparo, with a loud applause. Mrs. Amparo, welcome. Siga. All right, as you can see, Mrs. Amparo is wearing in her head a brain-computer interface with which we can read her mental activity and her motor commands. So we're going to project those onto the virtual arm that she sees on the screen. Very good, Mrs. Amparo. Take hold of this arm as if it were your own, and please flex your arm, Mrs. Amparo. Mrs. Amparo, now close the fist of your arm. Mrs. Amparo, relax your arm, once again as if it were yours. As you are seeing this, it's not an effect, tactile visual. Thank you very much, Mrs. Amparo. It's not a cardiovisual illusion either. This is actually a mental visual illusion. This is the real-time mental content of Mrs. Amparo being matched to an avatar, a virtual arm that is not hers, but will be very quickly adopted by her brain to accelerate the results of her phantom limb therapy. All right, but in this business of deceiving the brain, of creating illusions for the brain, many years ago I embarked on creating the greatest illusion that I could create for a brain. This time I wanted to convince a brain that sounds were no longer sounds, but were actually images. Yes, sound taken for images. This is how the C-Color project was born. In the C-Color project, I created a mathematical code which converted images of the real world into sounds. Then I locked myself in for a year with 20 blind people in a hospital in Switzerland. The goal was to therapeutically convince them that sounds were no longer sounds, but were actually images. In other words, that they could see through sounds. It was something like telling the brain that this sound was no longer a sound, but was actually the color blue, for example. Or that this other sound was no longer a sound, but was actually the image of a chair, for example. C-Color is now a functional prototype that is ready to help many blind people in the world. And I want to introduce it to you next.
At the end of the C-Color project,
we had blind people who could recognize objects, recognize faces, could walk without the help of a cane or a guide dog. Most importantly, after doing CT analysis, we were able to medically and clinically validate that these people had recovered 60% of brain activity in the visual cortex, which is the one that shuts down when blindness takes on a brain. I mean, they were actually seeing through the ears. This whole story. Just to tell you that in all these years of brain study, since I started out as a university student, to this day, I have learned that it doesn't take much to do science. Just creativity and things as simple as a rubber hand or a flashlight to illuminate the legs. With only that, we can answer big unknowns. An illusion can indeed transform a mind. And a transformed mind can heal a body, as you have seen. I'm Juan Gomez, a brain illusionist. Thank you very much.